Ladies and gentlemen, when you think about why your mind holds you back, the first thing you need to understand is that your brain wasn't designed for success, growth, or achievement. It was designed for survival. That means your brain doesn't care if you hit your goals, land that promotion, or start the business you've been dreaming of. Its number one job is to keep you alive. And the way it does that is by scanning for danger and avoiding risk. The problem is, in today's world, what your brain calls danger is often just discomfort, challenge, or the unknown. And instead of leaning into those things, it convinces you to stay safe, to stay still, to stay small. Back when survival meant avoiding predators, starvation, or harsh weather, this wiring was life-saving. But now the predators are mostly imaginary. They show up as fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of embarrassment. Your brain treats these fears the same way it treated a lion hiding in the grass. The alarm bells go off and suddenly your heart races, your palms sweat, and your mind starts throwing out excuses to retreat. To your brain, stepping into a meeting unprepared feels just as dangerous as walking into a cave alone. It doesn't care that one is career growth and the other is life-threatening. It reacts the same way. This survival wiring shows up in everyday choices. You should start exercising, but your brain says, not today, we're tired. You want to make that call, but your brain says, what if they reject you? You've been planning to work on that big project, but your brain says, let's clean the house first, then we'll get to it. It's sneaky because it dresses up fear as logic. It convinces you the safe option is the smart one, when really it's just the comfortable one. And if you listen long enough, you start believing that safety is the same as happiness. What's important to see here is that your brain is not your enemy. It's just outdated software. It's running on an old operating system that was built to keep our ancestors alive in a dangerous world. That system hasn't updated itself for modern life. So now it misfires constantly. Instead of protecting you from harm, it protects you from growth. Instead of pushing you forward, it holds you back. And unless you realize this, you'll spend years thinking you're weak, lazy, or unmotivated, when really you're just listening to survival wiring that was never designed for the life you want. When your brain sabotages you, it's not because you're broken, it's because you're human. That's how everyone's brain works. The difference between people who stay stuck and people who move forward is not whether they feel fear, it's what they do with it. Some people let survival wiring run their life, and others learn to recognize it for what it is, a false alarm. When you catch that voice saying, don't do it, it's risky, you can pause and ask, risky or just uncomfortable? That simple shift allows you to step outside your brain's wiring and see the bigger picture. Think about how many opportunities get lost because of this wiring. The chance to introduce yourself to someone important, to apply for a role you're not fully qualified for, to share your idea in a meeting. All those moments are uncomfortable but not dangerous. Yet your brain screams danger anyway. And if you obey it every time, you build a habit of staying small. The tragedy is not that the brain sabotages you. That's just nature. The tragedy is when you never realize it's happening and you confuse survival instincts with the truth. Recognizing that difference is the first step toward breaking free. The real power begins when you stop treating your thoughts as commands and start treating them as suggestions. Your brain might suggest you avoid the challenge, but you don't have to follow. It might suggest you procrastinate, but you can still act. The moment you understand that survival wiring is optional guidance, not law, you take back control. And control is what creates momentum. Momentum creates confidence. And confidence creates a different life than the one your brain would settle for if you let it run on autopilot. Negative self-talk is the language of sabotage. It doesn't scream at you like an enemy across the battlefield. It whispers to you like a trusted advisor, feeding you reasons why you shouldn't, why you can't, why you'll fail if you try. That voice sounds familiar because it lives inside your own head, and it often uses your own tone, which makes it incredibly convincing. You don't recognize it as sabotage. You mistake it for common sense, for practicality, for being realistic. But in reality, it's the exact reason you stay stuck in the same cycles, repeating the same patterns, never fully breaking through. Think about the words that voice uses. It doesn't say you're a complete failure at life. That would be too obvious to ignore. Instead, it says things like, you're not ready yet, or let's wait until you feel more confident, or other people are better at this than you are. It makes the sabotage sound logical, even pretend. And because you don't see it as sabotage, You nod along with it, convincing yourself you're making smart choices. That's how self-talk becomes the perfect disguise for fear. It doesn't stop you with chains, it stops you with reasoning that feels safe. Every time you listen to negative self-talk, you strengthen it. It's like giving that voice the microphone and letting it run the show. Soon the habit builds, the voice becomes automatic, showing up before every big moment, ready to talk you down. You might think you're just cautious or realistic, but in reality you've trained your brain to sabotage you faster than you can act. The worst part is how quiet it is. Nobody else hears it. From the outside you look perfectly fine, but inside there's a constant stream of reasons why you're not enough. And that stream eventually feels like truth. The trick your brain plays is confusing safety with accuracy. Just because your brain says this is risky, doesn't mean it's true. It just means it's uncomfortable. Negative self-talk always has the same goal: keep you from moving forward. It might tell you you'll fail so you never try. It might tell you you're not as good as others so you don't compete. It might tell you people will laugh so you stay quiet. But what it never tells you is what happens when you do listen. It never shows you the opportunity missed, the growth delayed, the future version of yourself you never meet. What makes this so powerful is how personal the voice sounds. It knows your weaknesses because it's built from your experiences. If you grew up hearing certain criticisms, that voice will repeat them. If you failed in the past, that voice will remind you. It doesn't create anything new. It just takes old wounds and plays them on repeat. And the more you listen, the more real it feels. That's why people say I'm my own worst critic. The sabotage is personal, customized, and perfectly tailored to keep you where you are. It doesn't need to be loud because it knows exactly which button to press. The moment you start recognizing this pattern, you begin separating yourself from it. You realize that voice isn't you. It's just programming. It's just your brain recycling fear in the form of words. When you start to question it, the power shifts. You go from obeying the voice to observing it. You go from believing it to challenging it. The sabotage doesn't disappear, but it loses its grip because you no longer mistake it for the truth. You begin to hear it for what it really is. A scared part of your brain trying to keep you comfortable, not an accurate reflection of your ability. And here's the real breakthrough. Once you can name it, you can talk back to it. You don't have to fight it with anger. You just replace its vague fears with clear instructions. If the voice says you're not ready, you respond, maybe not, but I'm starting anyway. If the voice says you'll embarrass yourself, you respond, that's fine, I'll learn from it. It's not about silencing the voice. It's about proving you can move anyway. Over time, the negative self-talk loses its authority, and what used to sabotage you becomes background noise you can live with, but no longer follow. One of the biggest breakthroughs you can ever have is realizing you are not your thought. Most people spend their whole lives believing every single idea their mind throws at them as if it's all truth carved into stone. But your brain is like a radio. It's constantly broadcasting signals. And most of them are just noise. Some of those signals are helpful, like reminding you to eat or avoid danger. Others are just leftover static from fear, doubt, or past experiences. The problem starts when you confuse the broadcast with your identity, and you start believing the noise is who you are. Think about it this way. If your phone gives you a notification, you don't automatically assume it's important. You glance at it and you decide whether to respond or ignore it. Thoughts work the exact same way. A thought pops up like you're going to mess this up, and most people immediately absorb it as true. But what if that thought is just a push notification from your brain's survival wiring? You wouldn't blindly obey every app that pings your phone. So why blindly obey every sentence your brain spits out? The danger in identifying with your thoughts is that it locks you into a false story. If your mind says you're not good enough and you believe it, you start living as if it's fact. That belief shapes your choices, your body language, your energy, and eventually your results. And the results reinforce the thought, creating a cycle that feels impossible to escape. But the reality is that thought was never the truth. It was just a sentence your brain generated in the moment. By believing it, you gave it life when all along you had the option not to. One of the most freeing realizations is that your brain will generate negative thoughts, no matter how successful, confident, or capable you become. Even the best athletes, leaders and performers hear voices of doubt in their head. The difference is they've learned to see those thoughts as background noise. Instead of commands, they treat them as suggestions, not orders. When a thought says don't do it, you'll fail, they answer back, noted, but I'm going anyway. That separation between you and your thoughts is what allows you to act despite the fear, instead of being paralyzed by it. The truth is your brain is like a storyteller that never stops talking. It tells you stories about the future that haven't happened, stories about the past that can't be changed, and stories about the present that are often distorted. You don't have to silence the storyteller. You just have to stop confusing the story with reality. When you realize you're the listener, not the voice, you gain control. You can let the story play in the background without letting it dictate your actions. You can hear "I'm not confident enough" and still walk into the room with your head up. This is why mindfulness practices exist. Not to empty your brain of thoughts, but to create space between the thought and your response. That space is where freedom lives. Instead of being swept away by every idea, you learn to pause and observe. Oh, there's that thought again. Interest. That shift might sound small, but it changes everything. Because once you stop fusing your identity with your thoughts, you stop being defined by them. You're no longer the insecure sentence, the doubtful story, the fearful narrative. You're the observer who gets to choose what to do next. And that choice is where the power comes in. You don't need to control every thought that shows up. You couldn't if you tried. What you can control is your response. You can choose to ignore it, to replace it, or to act in spite of it. The thought is just noise, but your action is what creates reality. The moment you separate yourself from your thoughts, you stop living in the prison of your own head, and start living in the world where change actually happens. And in that world, thoughts no longer sabotage you. They just remind you that you're human. Your mind is not a fixed object. It's a muscle, and like any muscle, it can be trained. When you first walk into a gym, you don't expect to lift the heaviest weights right away. You start small, you build consistency, and you get stronger over time. The same is true with your thoughts. You don't train your mind by flipping a switch. You train it by giving it clear, repeated instructions, until those instructions become automatic. The same way a weak muscle gets stronger with repetition, a wandering mind gets disciplined with practice. Think about how easily your mind drifts when you don't give it direction. If you sit down with no plan, your brain will run straight toward distraction. It will replay old mistakes, invent imaginary problems, or tempt you with easier, more comfortable tasks. That's not because you're broken. It's because an untrained muscle always defaults to what feels easiest. Training your mind is about teaching it where to go, and reminding it over and over until that path becomes the natural one. The first reps feel awkward, but that's how every workout begins. Clarity is the first step in training. Your brain doesn't follow vague instructions, like be better or be productive. It needs specific commands the same way your muscles need specific exercises. You wouldn't walk into a gym and say, "I'll just get strong today." You'd choose squats, push-ups, or curls. Your brain works the same way. Instead of saying, "I'll try to be focused," you tell it, "For the next 20 minutes, we are finishing this email." That precision gives your mind something it can actually follow, instead of floating in uncertainty. Repetition is the second step. A single workout doesn't change your body, and a single clear thought doesn't change your mind. But consistency does. Every time you give your brain a direct order and follow through, you reinforce the habit. Over time, the brain begins to expect the instruction, and the sabotage gets quieter. It learns, oh, this is what we do when this situation comes up. Just like a trained muscle knows how to respond under pressure, a trained mind knows how to respond when fear or doubt shows up. Discipline is the third step. Training any muscle requires pushing through resistance. And training your mind is no different. The resistance shows up as procrastination, excuses, and fear. But every time you push back, you build strength. You prove to yourself that you can act even when you don't feel like it. That proof becomes fuel. And the more you collect it, the stronger your mental discipline becomes. Discipline isn't about never feeling resistance. It's about building the strength to move anyway. And that strength comes from training, not waiting for motivation. Think about the athletes,
performers or leaders you admire, they don't rely on raw talent alone. They train their minds as much as their bodies. They give themselves orders under pressure. They stick to routines even when it's inconvenient. And they push through moments of doubt with practiced mental discipline. What looks like confidence from the outside is really the result of thousands of small mental reps on the inside. They've trained their minds to respond automatically in ways that support their goals instead of sabotage them. And here's the key: you don't need a perfect training plan to start. You just need small, consistent reps. Telling yourself, "I'm going to finish this task before checking my phone," is one rep. Saying, "I'm going to speak up once in this meeting," is another. Each small instruction followed by action is another curl, another squat, another push-up for your brain. Over time, the reps stack and the muscle grows. You don't notice it at first, but one day you look back and realize your mind listens to you more than it argues with you. And that's when the training shows its power. Clarity is the antidote to mental sabotage. When your brain doesn't know what to do, it fills the silence with noise, fear, doubt, and endless hesitation. Chaos is the default setting of an unfocused mind, and chaos always leads to procrastination. The reason you feel stuck so often isn't because you're lazy or incapable. It's because your mind doesn't have clear orders. Without them, it panics, invents problems, and finds 100 ways to keep you busy, but never productive. Clarity doesn't just guide your action, it calms the storm inside your head. Think about how different your energy feels when you wake up without a plan, versus when you know exactly what you're going to do. On the chaotic days, your brain jumps between options, chasing whatever feels easiest. You waste time deciding instead of doing. On the clear days, you don't spend energy negotiating with yourself. You just follow the plan. Clarity removes the decision fatigue that drains your focus and turns small tasks into giant obstacles. It narrows your path so your brain stops wandering into distraction. Chaos is sneaky because it disguises itself as freedom. We think having endless options makes life easier, but too many choices overwhelm the brain. That's why you can scroll for hours on a streaming app without picking a single movie. The same thing happens in your life. Too many options with no clear decision paralyze you. Your brain isn't built for constant open loops. It's built to execute on a target. Clarity gives it that target. The moment you say, "This is the next," the sabotage has less room to operate, because you've taken away the uncertainty it feeds on. Clarity also builds confidence. When your brain knows exactly what you expect of it, it doesn't waste energy second-guessing. Doubt thrives in vague instruction. If you tell yourself, "I need to be productive today," your brain doesn't know what that means, so it spirals into anxiety. But if you say, "At 10 hours a.m., I will make 3 phone calls," the brain has something solid to hold on to. Each time you hit a clear target, you prove to yourself that you can follow through, and that proof builds confidence. Brick by brick, the power of clarity shows up most in high-pressure moments. Imagine walking into a meeting with no clear goal, versus walking in, knowing, "I will make this one point." In the first scenario, your mind floods with worry about how you look, how people will react, and whether you're prepared. In the second, your mind is anchored to a single order, and everything else becomes background noise. Chaos multiplies pressure. Clarity absorbs. The clearer your orders, the less your brain sabotages you because it no longer has space to run wild with fear. Clarity doesn't mean creating a perfect plan. It means creating a simple one. Most people get stuck because they overcomplicate the process. They wait for the right time, the right mood, the right resources before taking action. That's chaos in disguise. Clarity cuts through the excuses by reducing everything to the next small obvious step. You don't have to know how the whole path will unfold. You just need to know the next move. That simple focus quiets the mental noise, and the more you practice it, the more natural it becomes to act instead of hesitate. And here's what makes clarity so powerful against sabotage. It creates momentum. Chaos keeps you circling in your head, replaying fears and doubt. Clarity pushes you into motion, and motion is what shuts the sabotage down. When you're acting on a clear order, your brain has less bandwidth to argue, and the action itself generates the confidence your brain was trying to talk you out of. Every clear step becomes evidence that you're capable, and that evidence stacks until your brain has no choice but to follow your lead instead of pulling you back into chaos.